Witam Państwa, szanowni panowie.
Good morning, everyone, dear ladies and gentlemen. Even though I'm here for the 23rd time, so I have not missed a single conference. I never remember which button I'm supposed to press to ensure that my slides move ahead. But fortunately, we have with us a specialist who will help me if needed. Yet another comment to start with is the following.
Kiedy zbliża się maj,
every year,
kiedy można się
come May, when we can expect circulars about conferences, I am wondering how to write a text that is based on true scientific research and would provide you a summary of the outcomes of such research. For instance, here we had two beautiful examples of such papers. Unfortunately, whenever I sit down to write my paper, something completely different comes to my mind, and instead of focusing on science, I start writing a text of more journalistic nature. Why is it so? Well, this damn architecture always manages to get on my nerves, especially the architects that produce sometimes shocking results. So the title of my presentation is Architecture Technique. Architecture Technology is the title of our conference, so it's a fertile field for many reflections. I decided to focus on a different aspect, even though the word technique will be used by me frequently, as well as architecture.
Pojawia się to stwierdzenie, o którym za chwilę w rozmaitych
as all of us know from many different publications, now architecture is a product for sale, or we can say it is simply a product for sale. It doesn't matter whether it's categorized as art or described as a sign, or it's explained in terms of its role in the lives of people, nations or countries. When I examine the activity of architects today, and I do not mean to say that to insult anybody or to be mean, I believe that the key idea behind designing today is to sell. And there are many regulations concerning construction. There are regulations concerning residential construction that aim at ensuring safety and security of residents of cities. So it's about regulating relationships between different inhabitants of this common urban space. These regulations, you can say immaterial in their nature, shape physically the urban space. So this more aware approach to regulation brings us, for instance, to Camillo Sitte, who linked the beauty of a city to the skillful and consistent construction of a city as a work of art with the rigid framework of an urban plan. So there was a lot about boundary lines, considerations, and the placement of dominant buildings. All of these were planning tools that he called artistic tools, artistic principles. So the plan was at the same time a document of local law and a record, some kind of a document fragmented image of high-quality space. So it would seem that in Sita's time and thereafter, that was a common scheme of action for the common good, but we all know that it was not the case in his times as well as in ours. So we can say that the reality of construction, as well as regulations and the spirits of regulation, has been in conflict. So constructors never agreed with the rules, and this is something that persists to this day. I would say that starting in 1989, we have been observing this conflict in Poland to a much greater extent. This conflict has been much more intense than before. So it is rather common to use every possibility to increase the return on investments, especially when it comes to residential construction. It is not a secret. There are books being written about it. We all read them. We clench our fists. But what can we do to change the situation? Well, it is sad, but it is to the detriment of the future residents of those buildings. And the most important thing that becomes in this whole process is the sales technique. So obtaining as many flats as possible, getting as many flats as possible on a single plot. First of all, the plots are developed in such a way to keep not more than 4 meters from the borders of the plot, and the rest is filled with the buildings, because these are the square meters of usable surface that we want to sell and that are being put to the market. If we recall the earliest houses designed by the earliest modernists, and if we have a look at the width, that was 6 meters. Why was it 6 meters? The point was to provide sufficient lighting of the entire floor surface. The hygiene of living in those buildings required such solutions to be put in place. Well, the 6 meters of width could not be kept. But if we have a look at this image that you can see in here, you can see that we have forgotten about the 6 meters a long time ago. We say that on the window sill, we should have sunshine for a specific number of hours throughout the day, but how about the rest of the apartment? This seems to be irrelevant. I have almost become a client of such a salesperson. They invited me indoors and told me that this is a dark space and then another dark space, and in a moment you will see a window. And I asked them, what are the dark surfaces for? Or maybe you have a lot of suitcases. These will be a perfect storage units where you can keep your skis, for instance. And this is why we have overly lengthy corridors in buildings, deep storage spaces, very long but very narrow rooms. So it looks like the interior of a tram, and all of these are square meters to be sold, and they do sell. The sales techniques perfected by property real estate agents are very helpful in this field. What is more, some elements of the interior previously considered necessary are disappearing. First of all, there's the kitchen as a separate room with a window. And now please show me a so-called high-level apartment building where a kitchen would be a separate room with a window. So all of the activities related to room preparation, so the hearth, which was the gathering point for the inhabitants of shacks many years ago, now this crucial place that was so fundamental to our predecessors is placed in the living room, and this is where we cook our dinners. I do understand that some of our ways of life have changed. We do not cook dinner that often. We go out to a restaurant, we prepare meals together with the guests that we have invited, and we even invite them to help us with dishwashing after eating. All of that makes part of our social life and play. But let us recall that from time to time we are preparing a herring, we are doing sauerkraut. So obviously the smell of the sauerkraut will enter our beautiful window dressings of our living room. But all of that is treated as fun, as a way of playing that has dominated our lives also from the perspective of this aspect. Now, thirdly, the prices per square meters of flats have remained very high despite many ideas proposed by many different politicians that would aim at reducing the prices. Let me give you an example. I live in the district of Ursynów in Warsaw, and on the opposite side of the road we had an office building. That was one of the ugliest buildings I have seen in my life, and one of the ugliest buildings ever constructed in Warsaw. Somebody bought it, a company, it was demolished, and now a construction of the so-called high-end residential building has started. And as you know, Ursynów is not in the center of Warsaw, it's in the suburbs basically. So I came there to ask about the price of the square meter, between 25 and 30,000 zlotys. For God's sake, 30,000 zlotys? So what should be the price for the single-family house that I live in? I never knew that I was such a rich man, that I own a property that's worth almost as much as the Wawel Castle. Well, it's absolutely absurd. And fourthly, it is quite common that the materials are cheap and the projects are executed in a careless manner. Well, I have to admit that one of the people responsible for the construction site on the opposite end of the street is one of my former students. So I asked him what kind of materials will be used. So I have to tell you, materials will be cheap. There will be lots of savings when it comes to the equipment of this project. So let me tell you one thing. This problem I have been discussing is related to the location of the buildings. At some point in time in the Białowęka district in Warsaw, this residential complex was constructed. 3 years later, the situation changed in the following way. So this single isolated residential complex that looked terrible on its own. Maybe from the bird's eye view it doesn't look that terrible, but if you go there today, you will see how this residential complex became unimportant, irrelevant, because of the hundreds of houses that are all the same. And what was a singular object that was publicized as a huge architectural mistake in the past today became an element of our everyday reality. This entire district, described in a great book a few years ago, Chaos Warsaw, and it's a great title. So this district is a great example of that. Whenever we propose a different kind of urban planning solutions, and here have a look on the left side of the slide, this is the residential complex planned. Well, there is some communication through the middle of this complex. There is some place where the residents can get together and build their common lives. There is an idea how to construct what we used to call the yard and what disappeared today, something that no longer exists. So the yard, when the youngest kids met their young neighbors, the friendships that survived for decades, today this space has disappeared. So that was the idea for this residential complex. We wanted to include the orchards that for generations were cultivated on the area. Unfortunately, the owner of the plot rejected the design because it would not generate sufficiently high return. Well, fine. Well, this residential complex, maybe you can't see it very well, but all of these houses had kitchens with windows. This is how we taught our students for decades. Somebody who designed a residential building without a lit kitchen, a kitchen with a window, was simply botched, was failed. Well, today it is impossible simply to ask somebody to leave the room because today they would complain. They would go to a special officer and in the end the teacher would lose their job. But this is how we used to teach our students. It turned out it is not necessary. Today everything is being designed differently. Yet another example. This is Grochowska Street in Warsaw. The top is the existing situation, the bottom is the design. The authors of this design for at least 3 years. Well, this design obviously evolved, and the designers talked to municipal councillors as well as residents about the beauty of residential design. So nobody understood the word, the beauty of residential design or the beauty of architecture. Everybody continued talking about one thing. Once new residents come here, what will happen to us? Well, they lived with the mess as above for 3 years longer instead of the architecture that you can see in the designs below. It seems to me that there is some hope, despite everything. For instance, in Warsaw, we have architectural studios by investors who focus on small projects that are really developed in the minute continued detail. Flats have kitchens that I continue to go back to. The prices are not excessively high. These are the studios that design for a specific type of a resident. And they know that when Wojtek comes here and he doesn't have, well, it's a bad example, I believe. Okay, so whenever I come and want to buy a flat and I can't afford to pay God knows how much, they will design it in such a way so that I can afford it and the investor can sell it so that both parties are happy. Because people who come there are the owners of the houses that were built somewhere in the area and they want to improve their living conditions. So here you have an entry to a building and you still have the rail tracks that were left as an element of the complex. Some elements ornamenting the yard as well as other elements that tell us that the genius loci, as we say, even in those simple projects such as residential construction, can and should be kept. And now to conclude, let me show you a place in Poland that is my destination for my holidays. It has been my holiday destination for decades. And I get a headache now every time whenever I go there. This is the Hell Peninsula. For the foreigners here, let me explain that the Hell has nothing to do with helium. Along the entire peninsula, which measures 35 kilometers, we have a beautiful beach. Well, it varies in width, and it's not divided into pieces such as the Italian beaches that you can see here in this drawing, where you have to pay for renting the umbrella and these two sunbeds. You can simply use this beach whenever you want, wherever you want, for free, and the only cost is the cost of transportation and, just the restaurant services, but the beach itself is not expensive at all. So there we have several towns. One of them is Jurata. This is a town that was established in the vicinity of the old fishermen's villages located on the shore. It was constructed completely differently. How so? Even before the war, in the 1920s, a group of entrepreneurs realized that the climate was fantastic. There were pine forests, the forests could be leased, split into plots in a logical way, and construct many different houses that weren't cheap. There were bungalows that weren't cheap even at that point, but they somehow fit into this village landscape, this rural landscape. And this is how the genius loci of Jurata was created. So Jurata was a destination for Minister Beck and generals. A Cossack painter from Krakow who bought a house in Jurata. You can still see his studio over there. There is the cafe, call it studio, and it continued this way for many years. Following the World War II, some of the people returned to their homes. Some, when they returned, they actually found out from the new residents that they are supposed to, leave and the ownership changed hands, and there were new building developed, as the one that you can see in here. This is a holiday home of the Ministry of the Interior, so this is where policemen came to holiday. Quite interesting, I have to tell you. In 1997, I stayed over there and I met several members of the police forces. I don't know if I should use the word police or milice. Well, they came from the traffic police section from my city, and I have to tell you that has been quite useful to me as a driver. So these were the buildings that were constructed, but there were also other buildings such as this one that's called Morskie Oko. Well, you can say the style is reminiscent of that typical of the Polish mountains, and it was transplanted to the Polish seaside. That was quite irritating, but not as much as these new projects constructed over the recent years, and this is one of the examples. The forms of these buildings mostly come from the imagination of the people who could afford to buy property there. The prices are the same as in Warsaw. So they were inspired by the imagination of the people and their idea of how you should vacation if you come from Las Vegas or Miami or some other place in California. So, well, I'm disregarding the issues such as the placement of the speakers. Yes, that is more like reminiscent of the concert sites. So the music really silences your heartbeat if you were in the vicinity. But just to conclude, we can say that there is a building, one of many, that for me was the example of a real tragedy. As you can see, it's called Villa Glamour, just in the center of Jurata, among the remaining bungalows. It is lit by dark blue light, but by night. The facade is not made of wood, but of metal slabs. Well, it's not only the metal slabs, but there are many patterns on them because they are not plain. Well, so my question is Jurata over or not? The authorities of municipality are located in Jastarnia. They are all for constructing as many buildings like this one as possible. We have no understanding there. Recently, last year, a camping site was closed, and the area in the middle of the forest in Jurata was cleared. The trees are cleared to construct a building that is going to be maybe even more beautiful than this glamour villa that you can see in the photo. So now my problem is, where should I vacation? Where should I go to spend my holiday? Maybe nowhere. We have been trying to find an alternative on the Baltic shore. Unfortunately, the glamour culture prevails everywhere. This is something that sells perfectly. There's no problem with finding a buyer. The sales technique, the persuasion technique, since John Smith lives this way, you, a person with money, have to follow the lot. Otherwise, what will you tell at the party in Warsaw? That you lived at some holiday? No, you need to buy a flat in Jurata, in Międzyzdroje. I don't know if any of you have recently been to Międzyzdroje. There are 15 stories high buildings being constructed on the beach along the alley of the stars. When I told someone that this building is being erected in such a way that it will cast a shade on the beach, so how will you use the sunshine? Well, none of the owners of the building or none of the representatives of the municipality thought about it. They are all for it, to have this monstrous high-rise building on the beaches. So you can't go to Międzyzdroje either. So we decided to go to Germany. Many residents moved out, and you still have there the towns full of wooden buildings constructed during the times of Kaiser. Well, I didn't like it much either. So I have to admit, just every year we go to Italy. We go there every September, looking for small towns, for small places where no high-rises have appeared yet. One of the favorite places for us is Calais in Calabria. One of our colleagues bought 1/10 of Civitavecchia and converted it into completely new apartments. But you don't know there where one house ends, where another one starts. It's an urban crest, very attractive for somebody who comes there for a month and stays there for a month. Highly attractive. Maybe you have to look for such places. Maybe we need to give up on staying at a glamour villa, obviously, if we dare. Will we dare? Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. Dziękujemy.
Thank you very much.